All right, welcome back to Conscious Construction, the Conscious Enneagram podcast. I'm Abby Robbins.
And I'm Kimberly Culbertson.
And today we're talking about type 5 in relationship. Wop, wop. That type 5 got a drum roll and a womp womp. Like, wow.
I like fives.
You know what? I really like fives too. I think of any other type around the circle, like, I just jive with fives.
You made a poem.
I know.
The fives is kind of where we hold hands. Between the 8 and the 7.
It's true. It's true.
It's like the low hand hold though.
Fives.
Fives.
Yeah.
They're all cringing. They're like, I don't want to hold your
They're
hand.
like, God, stop. Why? Just get to the facts.
Get to the facts.
Fun fact, of all of our episodes, the last 2 seasons, our type 5 episode of Beyond the Basics, which was last season, far and away the most viewed video on our YouTube channel, not necessarily on the audio only version of the podcast, but the YouTube video.
All the fives are on YouTube.
Well, they are. It's pretty bonkers. And I look through, and that's true for anytime I've done a series of YouTube videos, like where I do all the types, the 5 is just like, pew, like not even in the same stratosphere of like views and watch hours as any of the other types. So yeah, 5s, we'll just start off with 5s love YouTube. So cool.
Yeah, and information. But I also think maybe 5s tend to be kind of mysterious. So maybe 5's people are watching it.
That might be true.
Trying to figure out.
Because 4 is a close second.
Yeah.
4 is a close second. And I definitely think there's a lot of folks trying to watch the 4 videos, like taking notes, like how on earth do I deal with 4s? But yeah, so there's your first fun fact of the episode. Yeah. We'll try to sprinkle more fun facts throughout the episode, so all the 5s watching will be very excited.
But in the meantime, cheers to the 5s.
Cheers.
Thank you for watching our podcast.
Yes, thank you. You're going to help us get monetized. It's going to be great. So 5s in relationship, how we've been laying out all the other episodes is we've been talking about what types do well in relationship, where they struggle in relationship, what their work is, and how we can support them. So Kim, start us off with, what do 5s do well in relationship?
Yeah, some of my favorite people are 5s. And one thing that they do well is they're such good listeners. Like they ask really interesting questions.
Yeah.
And they just will be so present when they are present. And the 5s that I know, and I don't know if this is universally true, but when they're ready to be done being present, they will literally leave. Yeah. So with the other withdrawing types, you might be with them and they might not really be there, but most 5s that I know will actually be like, and I'm done. Like they'll voice now. It. Goodbye. They'll be clear. It might not be much of a transition, but it's like, I'm tired, I'm leaving now. And you're like, okay. Yeah. And I like that as a 7 because I feel like I know where they stand.
Yeah, it's very clear.
You know? I think that clarity.
That's another really big piece that I think is a huge benefit for 5s in relationships is they are incredibly clear. I talk a lot with my clients about this difference between like high context communication and low context communication. Essentially, like high context communication meaning you need a lot of context to understand what the person is trying to say, right? You might need to read between the lines. You might need to know other people and how they feel. And right, there's a lot that goes into that kind of communication, which can be really challenging for people like me who are very low context communicators. I don't want to beat around the bush. I don't want to play games. Just use your words and tell me what you mean. 5s are incredibly clear. They incredibly low context communication. What they say is exactly what they mean. And they won't say it if they don't mean it. Yep. Like that is
lovely.
It's so wonderful. Again, this is going to be a love fest about 5s. And I think, a lot of that is my own type structure coming through because I have so much trouble with trust and so much trouble with kind of the more soft and squishy emotions of relationships. 5s are so clear and so direct. It's very comforting to me. I do know that there are other types who find that kind of communication to be jarring and maybe even a little like brisk or harsh at times. And so I know it's not necessarily
Everybody's
always
preference.
considered a plus around the board, but it is 100% a plus for me. So I'm appreciative of that
Yeah.
in our fives.
And I will just add that I will just argue that is a plus around the
Yeah,
board.
just
even
yeah.
if you
even
don't
if you don't like it, it's still a
like
plus.
it, because like to give an example, you know, a 5 might say, I'm tired, I'm gonna head home. Whereas like maybe a high context would be like, well, I have an early meeting tomorrow. And then you have to do the labor of figuring out what they're actually saying, which is,
do they want me to ask you about the meeting?
I'm gonna leave,
or do you want me to excuse you?
I'd like,
or
maybe, and you get it wrong, and then there's resentment and frustration. And so I think we sometimes in the goal of being nice or soft, we really make communication harder than it needs to be.
Much harder.
And I think even people who find it brusque could benefit from
Absolutely.
like just really building some tolerance to people just saying what they mean directly, because then you're not doing their labor.
It takes
They're
a
doing
lot
their
of
labor.
it takes a lot of weight off your shoulders.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So.
I think another real benefit in relationship, fives are incredibly interesting. Like
Yes.
endlessly interesting. Again, you're talking to the two types who are probably most likely to be stoked about somebody being interesting. But like fives like to lay back. Right, so they don't have to be the center of attention, right? They can step back, they can be the wallflower, blend in, they can really kind of fly under the radar. But when you interact with a five, like they are anything but boring.
Yeah.
They know what they know so thoroughly that they are an absolute delight to talk to, right? If you're cool with talking about stuff. Now, if you want to talk about feelings, maybe like fives can intellectualize their feelings and could talk about them in that sense, but it's not going to be necessarily a warm fuzzy conversation.
Yeah, and they might listen to your feelings, but that doesn't mean they're going to reciprocate with their own necessarily.
Yeah.
Gotta have a lot of trust for that. And sometimes they're really into something that you find boring. So that's the one caveat.
Yeah.
Because fives will talk the most about what is really fascinating to them, and fives tend to have a deep dive knowledge about whatever is really, really fascinating to them.
You say that, but I don't know that I've ever met a five who I found boring, even if I didn't know. And I think this is both my like eightness and the one-to-one thing coming out. The way in which most fives generally engage with whatever they're into, like really scratches some itch for me. It's like, it's so intense.
It is
and
intense,
it's so like thorough. And it's like, and fives are great teachers. Like they love to share knowledge. And so if you're open to like learning, they are like, oh yes, I will give you the keys to the kingdom. Like they will just give you a download like you would not believe. And I love that. I think that is, that's how I want to relate to everyone, because there's no feelings involved. But I think that fives being really great teachers is another real benefit to them in relationship, because they know a lot and they know how to know things.
Yes.
Like if there's something that they want to learn, like they will learn it and learn it completely, and then they're happy to share that with others as long as there's that trust and connection, right? And they know that you want it. But like being in the withdrawn stance, there can be a sense of they think that what they know and what they do and what they experience doesn't matter to anyone else, so they're not going to necessarily be super forthcoming with any of that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to know if you're in close relationship with fives. A lot of people kind of sleep on their fives. Like they don't know how interesting they are. They don't know how much they have to say, because the five is the least likely, I think, of all the types to push into a conversation. Like that takes energy that they are not really keen to spend. Yeah. And so if you ask a question and then immediately like talking to the silence after the question, they will just let go of that question. Like they won't hold it, they won't push in. And so in order to really get to like the really fantastic things about the five,
a lot of restraint is required.
You have to understand that there's a lot of depth happening. There's a lot of really thoughtful, interesting things inside of that person. And if you never ask, you won't see them at all. Like they're not going to bring them to you like, hey, Like,
check this out. Yeah.
I'm an extroverted thinker and an extrovert in general. So if I'm thinking about something, there's a good chance you know it. If you're sitting across from me, like, sorry if this was a therapy day. But with the fives, they could be in this deep thought process that you would find really interesting and you would really like to know them. But they're never, maybe not never, but it takes a lot for the five to go, I want to talk to you about what I'm thinking about. And so, especially as you're building relationship, like, create that space and you're going to get all that gold.
Yeah. And I think that I think this segues really well into like where fives struggle in relationship. And what I find interesting, I was thinking about this earlier today in kind of prep for this episode, is that like the five, one of the main struggles for the five is actually very similar to the main struggle of the four, which is just showing up to relationship. Like the biggest struggle for the five in relationship is going to be that just showing up. You know, like what you were saying, they're not necessarily going to offer a lot right out of the gate. One, because they feel like what they have to offer doesn't really matter. There's that like deep withdrawn stance, unconscious belief that like my actions and my presence don't have consequence. But then they are also so deeply conservative of their energy that it's they're always kind of doing that math of like, well, showing up in this way is going to cost me, and then I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, and they're calculating that at all times. And so it can be hard for fives to take the risk, like the energetic risk on relationships, because they would have to put something forward that may or may not be reciprocated.
Right. And I think this is especially true when they think that what they're going to tell you is going to create an emotional reactivity.
Yeah.
And then they're going to have to deal with the emotional reactivity, and they don't necessarily want to. And so even when it would benefit them to tell you, like, I really don't like it when you do this and this, because they don't want to deal with your reactivity, they might just go like, just leave it alone.
And I think there is when we think about fives, the stereotype is kind of like of the like intellectual like hermit, right? Somebody who's really kind of pulled away. And I think so much of that for fives is this like very deep unconscious knowing that relationship requires feelings. Right? It requires being in the heart center in order to be relational. And fives know that they don't do that particularly well. And they don't do that with the same kind of speed and efficiency that a lot of other types do. So because fives are in that competency outlook, right, the conflict resolution style, they are always wanting to be competent, and they have a sense that they are not competent when it comes to the feeling parts of relationships. And so I think there's a lot of fear to even showing up to be in those sorts of relationships.
Yeah, like, it's not so much that they're frustrated by the emotional reactivity, it's that they're not sure what to do in that emotional reactivity. But I also think some of the best relators I know are fives. But they even if they feel very capable as relators, they know the cost of relationship. And they're not going to just do it for everyone.
Yeah.
So like the close friends that I have that are fives are so good at friendship. But their friendship net doesn't need to like cast very large. You know, like they know who their people are. They know they are going to engage in, like, they're going to pay the cost of having energy and the reciprocity that comes with friendship. But they are like really true friends. So I don't want to fall off the edge of like, well, they're not relational, or they're not friends, or they're not competent of that. But they have fear around competency, and they don't assume that you will want to be in a relationship with them if in areas that they're not competent in. Which is part of why the fives end up doing these deep dives about the things that they're really interested in, is because they want to know everything. So that if you ask them a question, they're going to have like a whole answer and a whole story. One of my favorite people who's a five is really deeply into beverages. And it started with he was a barista at a coffee
Yeah.
shop, and so then it kind of bled over to tea. So it was coffee and tea, and then he became a sommelier. So
Yeah.
and he does some brewing stuff with beer. So like
Yeah.
he is like a beverage guru, and he could talk for hours
Yeah.
about any of those things.
Any of them.
But part of it is he wants to, like, now that people think of him as someone who knows a lot about wine, he wants to make sure he knows everything about wine, you know?
Like, it's not enough to know a lot. They have to know everything.
Yeah, because that subconscious need is like, I'm going to be loved for my expertise and my competency. And the place where that sometimes is a struggle is that if you are in deep relationship with a 5, if that is your partner or that is your boss or, you know, whatever the case is, sometimes they want to talk about the things where they feel the most competent, and you want to talk to them about something emotional or your thing, and you don't want to like kind of slap them down about their thing. But like I've had a couple friends who are married to 5s that find it like,
it's challenging.
Yes, I care about your deep interest in this thing, but I actually don't care about that thing. I like that you're interested in it.
Yeah.
But how do I stay in this relationship, hearing about this thing over and over again, and still make space for things I need to talk to you about that you're not interested in?
Yeah.
And so that can be the struggle sometimes.
Yeah, because there is in all of like the competency types, there is this kind of rigidity that can come up, and we talk a lot about like the avarice of the 5s. That's the word we use for.
And everybody's like, oh, I only kind of know what that means.
Yeah, right. and then the like quick jump is to you know, define it as greed, but that's not really what it is, right?
I've never met a greedy 5.
Yeah.
The way that we would
typically understand greed.
Yeah.
But there is
frugality.
a lot of frugality, a lot of frugality. But there is something that is like kind of rigid in 5s that doesn't necessarily, like, not in when like when a 5 is operating out of their type, they will not give of themselves or their energy freely. Right? It is very guarded, it is very controlled. And so sometimes in those sorts of situations, like you mentioned, where like, hey, like I know you're talking about this thing, but like we really need to talk about this. And I know this doesn't interest you. I know it probably kind of scares you. I know you don't feel competent in it, but we have to address it.
Yeah.
In those sorts of situations, that's where we see the 5s really struggle to engage. And that can come off as being, and because 5s are also fairly removed from their own emotionality for this same kind of competency piece, it can really come off as being disinterested, being, you know, looking down on someone. It can come across as like, you know, the just like I'm alone in my tower and nobody understands me or nobody can whatever. But it's really this, like, it's really stemming from this fear of not being competent in these issues that they haven't done a deep study on. And the thing is, you can't do a deep study on someone else's emotions. Like, you can't Google that shit. Like,
Bummer.
I
wish I could Google mine. Tell me about this.
How do I feel? Enter. That's, yeah. And the 5s, I think the 5s in the same way, 5s have more access to their feelings than 7s or 8s do, but it's almost never in real time. Like no emotion.
Because they're still in the head center.
Yeah, very much so. No emotion is happening in real time. Like the processing is happening after the fact. They're not tuned into what's happening for them in the moment. And that can make it hard to be relational, and that can make it hard to like feel close to a 5.
Right.
And so these are the things that I feel like they really struggle with, is like showing up with their emotions in the moment, showing up with their, you know, showing up and being flexible and trying to listen and be open to something that frankly scares them.
Yeah. And I think as a withdrawing stance, that you kind of get a double whammy, because in order to process those feelings that they're having in real time,
they got to peace out.
They need to go internal for that processing.
Yeah.
And so you have both of those things making them want to move away from the conversation.
Yeah.
And so then when you add in how protective fives are of their resources, they have a plan for their energy output throughout a day. And they know, I'm going to be having a hard conversation in the evening. I'm going to conserve energy. I'm not going to get dragged into other things. I'm saving that energy. But if you kind of spring a hard thing on a five, then they might be out of energy. And when they're out of spoons, they're out, you know? And they don't mean it like, you're not important to me. But it's really easy to take it that way. If you're like surprised crying at a five about something they did that hurt your feelings, there's a strong chance that they're going to be like, I can't do this right now. And it's kind of hard sometimes to do the translation. Of
it's not because they don't care about you but that like legitimately they don't have the space. And
they're not ready for that. And like the fives come with a readiness for what they are, you know, available for. They know already what they're available for. And they know when they're not available. And that can feel really cold.
Well, and I think
especially surprising.
Moments. And I think that this is one of the biggest pieces of work for the fives is like building the capacity and the reserve to deal with things on the fly. Right? And that comes from, I've worked with a lot of fives, that comes from being in your body. And
dang.
I know, right? What did we tell the two a couple episodes ago that it was like, oh, twos, fuck you. When it's really, like, it's like, oh, you have to feel your own feelings or your own needs. Like, we're just going around and like telling everybody what they don't want to hear. But for fives, you know, part of this energy conservation is derived from the fact that they are not in touch with the part of themselves that generates energy. Right? So like they are body repressed, right? They are removed from the body. And if any type could be a head in a jar, it would be fives, right? They'd be fine with that.
Thinking about Futurama.
Yeah, right. There are so many great Futurama like tie-ins to personal growth. I could go on. But like if any type could be a head in a jar, it would be a five, right? But it's that desire to be just a head in a jar that keeps them so limited to their own energy. I was working with a five earlier this week, and I was like, we're going to work with the breath to develop your capacity and increase your energy and vitality. And they just laughed at me. They laughed right in my face. And I was like, what? And they were just like, they were like, it's really funny to think that you can just do that. And like that is the whole, I mean, it's not the whole purpose of yoga, but that is that is a lot of why yoga exists, right? That like we are working with and increasing our capacity for our own life force. And
like,
I
have some questions.
This five was just like, what?
How long have you been working with this particular five?
This was our first session.
Okay, because I'm like,
this is our first session.
What do you think we've been doing here?
No. It was more like, what do you think just happened? But yeah, like they believe so deeply that they only have this very limited amount of energy and they could never get any more. Like it might reset in the morning, but this is all they'll ever have because they aren't in touch with the part of themselves that can actually create more energy.
So interesting.
Every five I've ever worked with, it has been heavily focused on moving the body. And you know what happens? They get more energy. 100%. It has never not been the case.
It's really interesting to me thinking about the connection between the 5 and the 7, because I have probably the opposite problem. I am certain that my energy will never run out and that I can just manufacture more.
And then you just crash.
And then, it's detrimental in many ways. So
I also have that problem. I have that exact problem as well. As an 8, I'm like, I have all the energy in the world. I am never limited. And then we connect in the spot where it's like, I am only a small baby of energy. And this is all I will ever have.
But it's interesting because when the 5 starts to move to their vantage point, at 8, they can harness that energy a lot more.
Yeah.
And when they go to their refuge point of 7, they're still getting more energetic.
Yeah, they're still getting more energetic in a way.
But maybe they're not actually budgeting their energy anymore.
Yeah, it's like they're more frivolous. They're more
Yeah.
frivolous with the energy, which in some ways does allow them to experience more.
Yeah.
But then they kind of have that like hangover process, after the fact, where when they shift into the 8 space, that energy is more generative and is more sustaining because it's deeply grounded in the body.
Yeah, it is so great, like sidebar, to watch a 5 move into their 8 energy at the right time.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome.
Let me tell you something. No offense to 8s.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
But like,
I take none.
8s will, if nobody's coming up with ideas, 8s will just take the lead.
Yeah.
And they don't always have the best ideas in the room.
Nope.
Sometimes they do. I love 8s. But 5s...
Don't pander to us.
5s... I do love 8s. 5s almost always have the best ideas in the room, but they are rarely sharing them. And the more people in the room, the less space there is to step into. And because they are just not interested in like jockeying for position in a room, they're like, nah, I like my position by the wall. They are not going to bring their ideas, and that is to the detriment of the organization, to the family, to the
community, whatever it is.
They already know what we should do, but we're not even paying attention to them. So when you see a 5 in a group step up into their 8ness and be like, look, here is what we should do, it is like glorious to watch.
It's great.
And you should always go with.
Yeah, and I don't know a single 8 that wouldn't be like, fuck yeah, take the lead.
Yeah.
Like go, like you're here, you're stepping up, you are stepping up, let's go.
Let's go.
I'll follow your lead. Like I think 8s generally are very excited to do that with somebody that they have a lot of trust with. And generally speaking, I think 8s, as long as values are aligned, have a lot of trust with 5s just because of the way 5s move through the world. And so when a 5 moves up into that space, I think 8s generally are like, let's go.
Yeah. So I think that is part of the work for the 5 is to choose when to use their voice, and to use their voice when it's important, to offer up their ideas when they are needed, even though sometimes offering those ideas is costly energetically.
And I would actually slightly rephrase that.
Okay, rephrase it.
Because the issue with the 5s is they're never going to think it's important enough. Because you said
so the
step
first
up.
work is learn that your ideas are important.
Yeah.
And then the second work is use your voice.
And if you can't, I mean, we don't often get the opportunity to do the work in order like that. And so my suggestion to the 5s is just start saying your ideas. Like just show up. Even if you don't think it's important, that's fine. You will learn that it's important as you go. Otherwise, you get stuck in kind of this 5 mentality of always having to be competent before they move forward.
Yeah.
And that is a real struggle with 5s. And I think there's a lot of work to be done with 5s around this idea of competency. Because especially in relationship, right, in friendship, in intimate partnership, in work, I think maybe less in work relationships because there's kind of some other container holding things together. But in all of these other sorts of relationships, there are only things you can learn by doing them.
Yeah.
You don't get the benefit of knowing before you do it. And so kind of getting over that hump and embracing the fear and anxiety that might cause and stepping into it actually allows you to learn what it was you were trying to find out, right? But you can't, there are so many things in this world that you can't know until you do it, until you step into it. And if you're always waiting to know just a little bit more or to have the right information, or like you will miss out on the most beautiful parts of your life.
Yeah. I think what I mean is I think there's like a threshold for 5s where they will spend their energy to push their idea in.
Yeah.
And it has to feel important enough to them. So I have a friend who's a 5 and things will be going really sideways, and then later he'll say, that's some foolishness. But he's not trying to get in that.
Yeah.
He's just observing that's some foolishness, But if it's something that is necessary enough, eventually he'll be like, guys,
Yeah.
And there's like a threshold. And I think part of the work for the 5 is to like lower the threshold.
Yeah.
But you still can choose when you,
Absolutely.
when you engage. Like I love the statement, we're not required at every. What is the statement? No.
I don't know what it is either, but I say things like this to my clients all the time. Funnily enough, mostly my 8 and my 5 clients, where I'm like, you can still choose. Like the work does not require you to do this at all times, right? Like to do it in every single situation at all times. Like there is a level of discernment that you still get, right?
Right. But if you do the work, you now have the choice.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's kind of my encouragement to 5s who are just getting in the work is that like you've been so far on this side of the scale in order to find balance, you got to kind of push all the way over to the other side, right? Yeah. Like I tell 9s, like shoot for asshole. Like you're never going to get there, but it's going to balance out the scales a little bit. You're going to feel, right? Like your experience of what's happening is often wildly different from what's happening, right? Like, so if 5 is stepping out and they're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing. Nobody's going to believe me. Nobody has, trust in me or like faith in what I know or any, and really nothing could be farther from the truth. Even if you're stepping out on something you don't know everything you wish you knew, you still likely know more about the situation than anyone else in the room. That's not always the case, but like you're so far on this side that in order to balance the scales, you really need to push. Yeah. You need to attempt to get to that other side. You probably won't.
Like shoot for loudmouth.
Yeah, shoot for loudmouth, 5s. That's, oh man, what could we shoot for? This is going to be like a bonus episode. We'll go through and
shoot for this kind of asshole.
Yeah, shoot for this thing.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll add, and then let's move to how we can support. But I think one piece of knowledge that's really useful for 5s to know is that intimate relationships are rarely built on expertise. So like in a work environment, you could be like, wow, that person is fantastic at building these reports or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But in friendship, in romantic partnership, in parenting, like I can appreciate the things that my people are good at, but I'm not with them. They're not my people because they're good at that thing.
Yeah. And it's almost like in intimate relationship, there is no expertise.
Well, and also I think it's hard if someone's always the expert, it's hard to feel close to them.
Exactly. That's almost like exactly what I mean.
It's like putting a distance.
Yeah.
So when I want to be in like close friendship or close relationship with someone, I want to know them in the things that they're not excellent at. And those things are things that I hold tenderly, So for what it's worth, it won't lose you your intimacy to not be good at everything.
It'll actually gain you.
Yeah, it might give you more access to reciprocity and connection that makes like a really good fabric for intimacy.
And that I feel like that also speaks directly to this energy level thing. Is that like if you can't be in reciprocity, then you will always be running out of energy.
Because you're always giving your energy as you choose to, but you don't take it in.
Yeah.
Because you don't want anybody to give you their expertise because that means you need theirs.
Yeah. Oh man, it's just what would they call that? A sticky wicket?
Is that what they call it?
I don't know. Just seems like a fun word to say. So let's go into how we support the 5s in our lives. You've already sort of touched on it with this idea of kind of like backing up and giving a lot of space. Like asking questions and sitting. It's hard for both of us to do that. Everybody was like, they stopped talking. Is the podcast over? No, we're practicing. We're practicing the space. I think that's really important because 5s need that. 5s need the space in order to feel safe to step in.
For the love, if you ask a 5 a good question, don't immediately rescue them from the question and don't move on to something else before they can answer it.
Yeah.
Like, it sucks for 5s when they really, you ask a question, it's a good question. They want to give you a thoughtful answer. So they take a moment and then the whole conversation moves on. And it was like you almost cared enough to listen. So don't do that to your 5s. Like you want to ask and give space, even like to the point where you feel a little uncomfortable with that space.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And I think, there is, work for fives in like saying, hey, like, give me a minute. I'm thinking on this. I haven't just like totally zoned out, because I think that's what a lot of people feel.
Or they don't want to answer. That's why they're not answering.
Yeah. Yeah. I think giving that space, right. And fives kind of meeting that. I think another thing that's super helpful for fives is like, as we like support fives, is like encouraging them. There's so much about being in the flow of energy, that like you can't.
I feel like all the fives just shuddered, like, ugh.
Well, there is something to the fact that like you can't get more energy if you're not giving energy. Right? Like the universe works in such a way that like in order to get, you have to give. You get what you give. Whatever cheesy song lyric you want to insert there.
That's a great song lyric.
But it's very true. And so encouraging fives to not only like give of themselves, but then to like help them see how that brought something more into their life. Like, that's a real blind spot for fives. And so being able to kind of reflect that for them and like connect the dots for them can be really, really supportive.
Yeah. And I think, we've talked a lot this season about sometimes kind of giving them some space in their type. And I think with the five, one of the ways that you can love a five is really go along with them into something that they're interested in. Like hear the story, find out how they make beer, sit in the things that interest the person that you're with, because that is a lot of what brings them joy in life.
Yeah.
And then on the other side of that, like the challenge piece is to find ways to say like, okay, I want to hear what you're thinking about, but in 5 minutes, I want to be able to talk about something that I want. I need it to be my turn in about 5 minutes. So put some container around that. If you're struggling with like, how long do I have to sit in this? I have something burning that I need to talk about. And also I think in terms of creating space for a challenge, to invite them into things that they are not experts at, and then just be really tender and kind.
Yeah.
And like enjoy with them, help them enjoy doing something that they're not perfect at.
Yeah.
And create that space.
Yeah, that's good. I want to kind of circle back to this idea of like creating the space in conversation and in relationships, because I don't know that a lot of fives are like, it's not that it's always imbalanced in the way that fives can be and talk about things. Like, I need to talk about this in 5 minutes. Like, I think fives are often very okay with giving a lot of space in relationship.
Oh yeah, for
because
sure.
they're just not going to show up, right? They're going to like pull back. But I think what is harder for fives is this like banter, the back and forth. And so creating space for the five to be able to do this back and forth, where it's like, oh, well, you're talking about this thing. This reminds me of a thing that happened to me. And I'm going to talk about this for a second. And then does that elicit something in you that you can share with me? Like that is a style of conversation that can be incredibly connective, more so than just like, here's a download of information. Here's a download of information. Like even if that's not always the most connective way of communicating.
Right. I think the people who tend to get the big downloads from fives are people who are like, their spouse, their partner, their parent, their child, people, because you're right, they don't just download to anybody,
No.
And so, but when you're in one of those like really, really tight life relationships, that's where that can like rear its head a little bit.
Yeah.
You're not likely to have that with your coworker.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for watching, all of you fives. Drop a comment down below. Let us know how we did.
Yes.
Tell us about your special interest, what you're really into right now. I would love to hear about
Me
it.
too.
Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. It really does help the channel and it helps the podcast. If you're listening on a podcast app, be sure to rate us in the podcast app. And if you want to be super cool, you could share this with one of your friends. Let them know, if they're interested in the Enneagram, if they're not interested in the Enneagram. Or you could consider being a patron over on Patreon and supporting the work that we're doing.
Excellent. And we do have a retreat coming up. It is January 20th. And so tickets are on sale. There's a link below. And we would love to see you in person. And if you are not going to be in Austin, but you would like to join us, we will have a person running our online feed as well.
Yeah.
And so please join us that way.
Yeah, so interactive live feed for the online workshop. And I'm really excited about this workshop. I think it's going to be really fun if you've been following along this season. We're going to give you some opportunities to really dig in. Tickets are on sale now. You do get a discount if you come with another person. So, whether that's a partner or a friend or a coworker, just somebody random you met, go ahead, grab 2 tickets, and we'll see you in January.
Yes,
Again, thank you all for listening, and we'll see y'all in the next one.
Cheers.